All right, welcome back to another episode of Ziki1 Plays, and today is another brief guide following up on that EV guide that I did just a few weeks ago. This one is all about Pokemon's IVs.
Bum, bum, bum.
Ziki1 Plays. So what are IVs? IVs stand for individual values, and you can see them here on the right side of your screen. Basically, anytime that you catch a Pokemon or encounter a Pokemon, a dice is rolled in the background, a 31-sided dice. And each of the Pokemon that you encounter or catch are given a random number between 0 and 31 in each of their stats. These help determine their final stat distributions. And so, for instance, here is a Palafin. Palafin is a Pokemon I'm getting ready to train for VGC competitive. And so, in its attack stat, it only has 70, and so I'm going to EV train it to maximum, right? I'm even going to give it an adamant nature. That way it can hit extremely hard. And you can see that makes its final stat total be 262. Now, that is including the 31 IVs. The problem with IVs is, if Palafin has lower IVs than 31, you can see it directly, one for one, affects its stats at level 100, like Palafin is at. And so, ideally, in any relevant stat, you want to have that Pokemon's IVs be maxed out at 31. 31. Now, really quickly jumping into the game, how can we see that in the game? Well, when you complete the game, you are able to find a feature called the judge function. This happens automatically. After you finish the Academy Ace tournament, the next time you go to a Pokemon Center will be offered this judge function, all right? And I believe it's you're not able to refuse it, so you should be able to find it very easily. Moving my camera out of the way a little bit so you can see now. Let's go to my Palafin. This is the judge function, that, as you can see it, in your boxes. So my Palafin, you can see all the way around the spiral, it doesn't have any IVs that are considered best. Best is how the game denotes an IV of 31. So already, I have major problems here. My Pokemon's attack stat is not at best, and so it is not getting the most stats that it can possibly get. So I need to fix that if I want to use this Palafin for competitive. Now let's look at my Stonejourner. My Stonejourner also does not have any best stats. Even worse than that, however, it has a no good stat. No good is the game's shorthand way of telling you that IV is 0. So having a no good stat is obviously abysmally bad, especially if it's a stat that is relevant to your Pokemon. Now, having a no good stat in the attack stat that you're not using, such as special attack for Stonejourner or special attack for Palafin, isn't a bad thing. Actually, it can be used to your advantage in some cases, in which I'll get into here in just a moment. Now, let's look at one more Pokemon here, and let's look at this Dragonite. This Dragonite has not been EV trained at all. In fact, I just caught him in a 6-star raid. He has 5 IVs that say best. Why is that? Well, that's because in raids, Pokemon are guaranteed to have a certain number of perfect IVs. How is that determined? It's determined by the star of the raid. If it's a 6-star raid, the Pokemon is guaranteed to have 5 perfect IVs. 5-star raids have 4 perfect IVs. 4-star raids have 3 perfect IVs, and so on and so forth down the chain. 1-star raids having no guaranteed IVs, and they have 6 random dice rolls, just like a random encounter does. This is especially important when talking about shiny Pokemon, because some of the easiest ways to find shiny Pokemon, such as my Bellybolt here, my Kilowattrel here, or even my Palafin that I was referencing a minute ago, is to use the mass encounter, mass outbreak, or to use shiny sandwiches to find random encounter shinies in the wild. However, this method does not guarantee IVs. So does this mean that shiny Pokemon are just unusable because they're not able to have those high IVs? No, it does not, because there is a method in the game of raising IVs. All right? So once again, going back to my Palafin and my Stonejourner as examples. My Palafin's stats in the game are more like this. 10, 20, 20, 15 maybe, like basically random IVs. They're nowhere near what I want them to be. So what I need to do is raise the stats that I'm going to be using, which in Palafin's case is everything except for special attacks. So that can stay at 20. But, everything else needs to go to 31 so that my stats have the best potential of holding together and being competitive, all right? So for Palafin, what I'm going to do is I'm going to withdraw him from my box, all right? Once I have him in my party, then I will use my Y button in the overworld to fly to this town right here in the snowy mountain area. The town is called Montenevera. When you fly to Montenevera, there is an NPC here in this town that will help you raise your IV stats. Notice that your stats, as far as IVs go, can only be raised up to 31. They cannot be decreased, and you cannot raise them to any level which you so desire. You must go to 31 or leave them where they're at. How do you do this? Well, there's a couple of different ways. There are 2 different items that we'll be using here. The first is called, and I actually went the wrong way in my menu here. Let me go back up and go to the bottom of the list. The first is called a bottle cap. The bottle cap raises one Pokemon's individual value to 31. One Pokemon's single stat to 31. So you would need 4 or 5 per Pokemon depending on how many stats you want to raise. A golden bottle cap, on the other hand, raises all 6 of the Pokemon stats to 31 IVs. I do not have any gold bottle caps. They can be they can be picked up by doing the auctions at Porta Marinata. They can also be picked up a couple of other ways, but the auction being the most consistent, all right? And so these bottle caps that I have will work just fine. I'm going to talk to this NPC. He says, welcome to Hyper Training. And I'm going to go into my menu here and select Palafin because Palafin's stats are sorely lacking. So I'm going to select him, and then he's going to say, which kind of bottle caps do you want to use? All I have is regulars. And then he asks me what stat I want to raise. I'm going to raise HP, attack, defense, special defense, and speed. Again, I'm never going to use a special attack on my Palafin, and so I'm going to leave that where it is. And I'm going to hit start the training. And it's very quick. Little sound effect, little black screen. And now Darla's hyper training is complete. Let's back out of the menus and see now what my boxes are saying. When I scroll over to Darla, as you can see, all of those stats that I selected are now hyper trained. Hyper trained is the equivalent of a best stat. And so it raises that stat to 31 individual values, now making it where the message below reads amazing stats, and Palafin is competitively viable. I also do this with all of my raid Pokemon. Some of the most popular ones being Koraidon. You see here, he was guaranteed to get 3 best IVs just from encountering him, but he also had some that were lacking, and so I used some bottle caps to raise those to hyper trained. Now, he has the best possible stats that he can have for raid battles. Really quickly going over a couple of more pieces of information concerning best IVs. The static encounter of the legendary Pokemon, including your Koraidon or your Miraidon, or including your legends, such as Wo-Chien here, you can guarantee that you will get at least 3 perfect IVs. I've already been over how Terra raid battles work in terms of guaranteed perfect IVs. There's one other thing to go over, however, and that is the Terra Pokemon that you find in the wild. This Jolteon came from a Terra encounter in the wild. I believe it was a Terra Electric, and I walked up on it, and it was glowing, and when I interacted with it, it terastallized immediately, and when I caught it, it had 3 perfect IVs. It also is at level 50. Compare this to a terastallized Lucario here that I caught, and it too had 3 perfect IVs, and so it is a good bet that any Pokemon that you find in the wild that is terastallized can be caught and expected to have 3 perfect IVs. Now, that's the bulk of the information. However, there's a couple more items that I want to go over with you, and that is having to do with when do you not want a perfect IV. Because pretty much in every situation, it's fine for all of your Pokemon stats to be at 31 and them to have totally maxed out IVs. There are basically two cases that you want to choose to not have a perfect IV spread. So the first thing I want to reference is a Pokemon that's been on my recent Hattie Trick Room team. That is the namesake Hatterene. Hatterene has a couple of stats that we do not want to max out. We want to have 31 in all of the relevant stats, special attack, defense, special defense, and HP. But in terms of speed, let's put its level down to 50, because that's the level they are in VGC. In terms of speed, if I have 31 in my speed stat, I'm going to be faster than a Hatterene that has 0 in its speed stat of IVs. And so I need to make sure that my Hatterene has the least amount of IVs as possible and has a negative nature such as quiet, so that my speed stat can get down to the lowest it can possibly get down to, 30, so that when I use a move like Trick Room for 5 turns, turn order is reversed. In other words, the slowest Pokemon moves first. Hatterene becomes the slowest Pokemon on the field. Another example would be Torkoal. Many Pokemon trainers run Torkoal on a team even if they are not running a Trick Room strategy. Why is that? Because Torkoal has a 20 base speed total. So if you take that IV down to 0, take his level down to 50, which is where it would be in VGC, and gave it that quiet nature like I mentioned before, now Torkoal's speed is at an abysmal 22, which is even slower than Hatterene, making Torkoal able to move faster in Trick Room than Hatterene can even move. So how does this matter? Well, Torkoal under Trick Room can usually outspeed and do a huge chunk of damage to Hatterene. But if my opponent, for instance, forgot to make sure that Torkoal had 0 IVs and say Torkoal had 31 IVs, all of a sudden, my Hatterene could use its ground Terra type to one-shot the opposing Torkoal before the Torkoal had an opportunity to move, because they did not do their IVs correctly, my Hatterene outspeeds under Trick Room. So in Trick Room strategies, you're going to want your Pokemon to have 0 IVs in their speed stat a lot of the time. What is the one other type of zeroing out for an IV that you would like to prefer? Well, that would be a 0 in the attack stat if you're using a special attacker. Why is that? Well, that's because of the move Foul Play. Foul Play goes off of your opponent's attack stat. So if a Pokemon like Murkrow were to use Foul Play into my Hatterene, and I had 31 IVs, it would be using the 110 attack stat to attack my defense. But if I had 0 in my IVs, then Foul Play would be using my 95 base attack stat to attack me. And so the attack stat matters slightly less than the speed stat does. But there are some cases where you want 0 IVs for competitive Pokemon in the attack stat. Jumping back into the game, one more time, I thought I would show off my Hatterene in the game. So here's my Hatterene, named Sammy after my lovely wife. And its stats are perfect. As you can see, best in special attack, defense, and HP, but no good in speed and attack, guaranteeing that my stat distribution is going to be the slowest in the minimum amount of attack that it could possibly be. And as you can see also, I had to hypertrain the special defense to raise it to 31. And so now my Hatterene looks exactly like this one does in Pokemon Showdown. And like I've said before, PokemonShowdown.com is one of the best places that you can learn and start experimenting with IVs and how to use them, and EVs and natures and all of that stuff. And so please stay tuned, as I'm going to be doing some nature guides as well coming up very soon. But I hope this information about IVs was helpful to you as you get started on your journey in competitive Pokemon. As always, stay safe out there, and peace out.